Tonight, we are looking into what's left for lawmakers this year. They approved an $18 billion budget, with the Republican-led legislature passing hundreds of bills.
Our Democrat governor has vetoed more than 40% of those measures. Still, the legislature has yet to adjourn for the year. They're working into the summer. Our political editor, Dennis Welch, here in the studio. They're still on break, though, aren't they? They're coming back, though?
It's still on break, as you were mentioning. It seems like they've already done plenty, and there's just not much left for them to do. Now, heading into the legislature's current break, which has been a long one, the Senate planned to hold hearings on the governor's nominees to run key state agencies. But tensions between the governor and the GOP majority leadership in the legislature have escalated to the point that those hearings have been put on an indefinite pause. Now, Senate President Warren Peterson recently sent a letter to the governor to discuss ways to move forward in a, quote, bipartisan manner. And that letter, it says, in part, my constituents and Senate colleagues are concerned by a slew of executive orders you have issued while we were in recess. Among the orders, Hobbs essentially stripped county attorneys of their authority to prosecute abortion-related crimes. Hobbs also granted state employees access to transgender medical care, including gender-affirming surgeries. In response, the Senate halted the committee charged with vetting the governor's picks to run those key state agencies. Republican Senate Pro Tem T.J. Shope, who sits on that panel, thinks that a discussion between the governor and the Senate president could be productive despite the political posturing.
I absolutely do. Look, we've had very good discussions and very good hearings, I think, with all the nominees. The reality is this. We are hiring, in essence, a CEO for each of these departments. I would imagine that in the business community, any CEO that is hired has to go through a very rigorous process.
Clear, the governor has not indicated in any way that she is interested in meeting with Peterson at this time. Now, Senator Shope also suggested that Republicans may try to block some of the governor's executive orders once they return to the Capitol at the end of the month. But again, even if they do pass that kind of legislation, it would be largely symbolic, a symbolic gesture, because the governor would most likely veto it, and the GOP does not have the votes to override a veto.
So speaking of those executive orders, late today, Maricopa County Attorney Rachel Mitchell officially asking the governor to rescind that order that deals with saying only the state attorney general can prosecute abortion cases. And now state lawmakers are pushing for her to walk back another executive order.
And that's talking about this largely scientifically discredited conversion therapy. It's aimed at trying to change someone's sexual orientation. People I've talked to, I mean, she issued that order saying that the state shouldn't be involved or supporting that kind of therapy in any way. Now, some of the folks on the conservative side that I've spoken to think that that was a solution looking for a problem. But I think the governor's trying to get out in front of something like this and doesn't want the state involved in any of this kind of stuff. And like, is the governor going to rescind this kind of stuff? I wouldn't count on it. I think there is still, again, a lot more political posturing going on. I think you'll be seeing some lawsuits coming out here in the near future.
Yeah, a number of states already have bans on conversion therapy, so we'll see what happens. Dennis, thanks.